Major funding for this program is provided by Eastern Airlines and Florida Public Broadcasting Services, Incorporated.
Enduring peace requires openness, honest communications, and opportunities for our peoples to get to know one another directly. Imagine if people in our nation could see the Bolshoi Ballet again, while Soviet citizens could see American plays and hear groups like the Beach Boys. We're proposing the broadest people-to-people exchanges in the history of American-Soviet relations. Such proposals will not bridge our differences, but people-to-people contacts can build genuine constituencies for peace in both countries. After all, people don't start wars. Governments do.
On the eve of a major peace summit between the United States and the Soviet Union, a group of American folk dancers and musicians traveled to 5 Soviet cities, hoping to help bridge with song and dance the gap that a war of words has failed to close. Their story is a tale of 2 cities, 2 sisters that began with the meeting of an American merchant marineman, Stephen Kalishman, and a Soviet woman in the Soviet port city of Novorossiysk. Following their marriage and move to Gainesville, Florida, they helped to initiate a people-to-people exchange between their sister cities. The Kalishmans, together with the Cross Creek Cloggers, the Bucksnord Barn Dance Band, and 29 friends and fellow diplomats, set off on a musical mission. Their goal? To ask their sister to dance.
Well, we wanted to go to the Soviet Union to dance. That was the clearest, best reason we had. It was a pipe dream, you know, one of those silly things that you think of that never has a way of coming to be, except I just heard about it. So I went and talked to Steve Kalishman from the Sister Cities program and said, what about this silly idea? And he said, okay, you can go. So we began what was a pretty amazing year of trying to raise that money and learn an awful lot about ourselves and our dancing and our music and the people in the town and ultimately the people in the Soviet Union. Very early I got up for sunrise and went out and sat where I could see the sunrise on the Kremlin, and the sun hit those golden domes, and a thought that I just couldn't keep out of my mind was it'd be a terrible, terrible shame for something that, for me to somehow be responsible for the destruction of those really beautiful buildings. And that's what I wrote that morning, that I have a responsibility to see that that doesn't happen. And so we spent a day or two getting to know Moscow a little bit, taking rides around and looking at the sights.
I think for all of us, there's a shock to come into Moscow and suddenly be confronted with Red Square, because this is the image that everybody has, and I don't think most of us know much beyond that. And so you're excited walking the cobblestones of Red Square, and you're fascinated with St. Basil's, and you're fascinated with the domes above the wall. And then after that, you come to see it not as a historic monument, but as a functioning entity. You go in through the gates, and surrounding the churches are going to be the governmental buildings from which the Soviet Union is run, and really run because it's all run from the center. And you feel there must be a real impact of this kind of a setting on the men who run the Kremlin. And if you live in sterile, modern governmental buildings, you tend to think pragmatically in terms of immediate problems, but the Politburo and the Russian administrative system looks out and sees all of these around them all the time. And so I should think their sense of history is greatly enlarged, and their feeling about there being a Russia as well as there being a Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. So I think this probably has a tremendous impact upon them. You get outside in the city, and we didn't really see much that was historic. We saw enormous piles of poured concrete, and we saw the memorials to various events in Russian history, and particularly to cultural leaders and cultural places. And we saw the parks. I thought this is what most impressed Jean and me, and that is what is done in the public sphere of the Soviet Union. The parks, the memorials, the sports stadiums. And I think when you first arrived, you're impressed with the Soviet Union, and you tend to want to praise them, apart from the food in Moscow, for what they've done.
Well, one of the things that we wanted to do while we were in the Soviet Union was some spontaneous performances on the street for the public. Although that's not usually done there, we said, well, nothing else we've done is usually done there either, so why not?
One of the most fortunate occurrences of the whole trip was Steve Kalishman had made an acquaintance of a man from Samhain Films, I think. And he knew of some Soviet folk singers and dancers who were interested in meeting us. And so we made arrangements to meet with those people. So after supper the next day, we had our shoes and our clothes, and our band was with us and everything. So we were standing around waiting for some members of the group to come, and decided we should warm up, dance a little. Well, that's fine. We do that before every performance. The thing was, this happened to be on Gorky Street in downtown Moscow, in front of the in-tourist hotel there. And it just seems like this wasn't normally done. We attracted a pretty large crowd, and it was my first chance to talk to a crowd about our dancing. I look it in their faces. I almost wanted to tell Natasha to stop translating. I can handle this one. I can do this. Because it just seemed like there was no difference. They were a crowd watching us dance, clapping their hands, smiling. We were joking with them. Every bit as normal as it should have been.
We had dinner and we were waiting for David, who disappeared, to go to the park with us. Being dancers, we said, well, hey, let's dance. And we did it. And that was our first, breaking loose. The newness of it had worn off, and we realized that it wasn't like KGB men everywhere, and that we could kind of do what we wanted to do.
I think it was pretty obvious that it was spontaneous. And immediately the crowd started gathering. And there was such welcome on their faces, so much curiosity, and so much warmth that anyone performing, anyone watching, being an outsider, could see that it wasn't set up, because the people were passing by, they would stop, look, and they were in a hurry, they would leave, but mostly they were standing. And within 5 or 10 minutes, the street was crowded. Maybe that was one of the problems that we had, that we actually blocked the traffic.
After that spontaneous performance by the cloggers on the steps of the in-tourist hotel, the group headed off elsewhere. They headed off to meet the singing and dancing students of a famous Russian folk singer, Dmitry Petrovsky. We were to meet in a monument in the woods. This monument was built in honor of the founding of Moscow. And so I thought it was particularly interesting to be with this group. And they're sometimes in life, magical moments. And I thought one of the magical moments was when we came out of the subway in Moscow at the dusk and were met by the Russian singers, and they put their arms around the cloggers, around Jean, around some of the others, and they walked through the woods along the trails. These are wild parks, not neatly groomed ones as in the center of town, singing. And I thought this was a magic moment. Part of the magic was hearing this strange, eerie mix of 1,000-year-old Celtic music combined with the traditional American folk music.
All join hands, circle left. Stand right, right hand round. Right hand.
You know, folk music is better, like tonight, learning it like this, I think, than in school. You know, you learn
slowly.
Learning, you know.
Лучше учиться вечером, чем где-то в школе.
Well, following what turned out to be a real successful evening in Moscow with the dancers and the singers, we were off next day to Kiev, just really rolling. Well, we got to Kiev hoping the same kinds of things would happen, the dancing formally, but then the spontaneous stuff, because our hotel was right on the square, and boy, there are a lot of people. Well, we found out that little impromptu performance in Moscow had caused some kind of stir. The latest news is that Steve got a telex from Moscow to the service bureau here saying that we're not to dance in the streets. That was, and I got that information, and that the hotel here would offer us a stage to rehearse on, but then I went to sleep. Steve woke me up to tell me that we couldn't do it, and so I went back to sleep, and then Cindy and Sissy woke me up to tell me we're gonna do it. And it was, I don't know, Mary. How about Huggy?
We're having an informal practice, right?
We just happen to be wearing these.
Kiev is a very large city. It's one of the most important cities in the Soviet Union. It's a very beautiful city, with lots of trees, people in the streets. In fact, a lot of people in the streets, and we thought they were very well dressed in summer clothing, bright, cheerful atmosphere. A lot of activity, people shopping, sunning themselves, seeing and being seen. The plaza of Kiev was a delight. All of us, I think, were immediately attracted to it. Our hotel sat up high on a hill, overlooking the main square, Kalinin Square, I think it's called. And we walked down past the vast statue of Lenin, who dominates the city, looking over it with a very stern look with his lesser figures around him. Walked down to the plaza, and here is just a wonderful public place full of people, women in baby carriages and old men and kids running around, dipping their hands in the fountains, which were burbling away. The fact that Russians apparently love ice cream and are willing to stand in long lines to buy ice cream, and people waiting and using public vending machines for the sale of different kind of beverages. Water, lemonade, beer, other kinds of soda pop were dispensed out of a vending machine, kind of like a Coke machine, except having there weren't bottles, they were simply glasses made of glass, not plastic or anything, which you took, put in an inverted thing, washed out, and then turned upside down, pushed a button after putting your coin in, and then it filled up with the liquid that you had requested. And then you finished, drank your drink, and then put the glass back on the shelf for the next person to use. And the Americans were flabbergasted at this apparently very unsanitary public facility, yet it didn't seem to stop the Russians from using these in every corner practically that we went to in Moscow, Kiev, Krasnodar, Leningrad. They were everywhere.
One of the most memorable things of the trip to Krasnodar was a day spent out to a collective farm. You know, it's my vision of a collective farm. It's the soul of the Soviet Union. That's the symbol of it. So we're real interested in seeing this place, thinking, you know, see a little tiny farm and a few little peasants. Well, wrong. Turns out it's a 30,000 acre thing that's got 4,000 people working there and 10,000 people living there. And then rode around, and then it got hot, so we stopped at the fruit part of this, and the directress, the woman who directs the fruit and vegetables section of the farm, had us into their common house and sat us down to all the fruit we could possibly eat. And so we thought, out of politeness, you know, we'll eat everything that's in front of us. Well, it turns out there's an unlimited supply of this fruit. So we ate all of that 3 times, and then because we ate so much watermelon, she gave us 8 or 10 or 12 watermelons to take with us on the bus. So we sang a little song for her when we were leaving and went off feeling really full.
Well, this was a huge collective farm, and fruit crops was one of the jewel in the crown, so to speak. And Mama was in charge of the 350 workers that brought the fruit in and kept the orchards going. She was a robust, brightly dressed, henna'd-haired woman who had served in the National Soviet. So politically, she was very powerful. I had a feeling that she was probably a very strong administrator, but ruled with love rather than with terror. Everyone around her treated her with great affection first and deference second. When I made a comment to her that I liked Soviet women, that they seemed warm and open, she just engulfed me and then brought on the roses and the fruit and made a big fuss out of me. I think the key was to relate to her as a woman to woman, and a political woman to a political woman. That was the warmest reception I've got anywhere across Russia.
But then we realized that we had to dance with all this watermelon inside us. And so we went off and we got to the hall, and it was a nice stage, good solid stage. And in the excitement about the dancing, all of a sudden that fruit was sitting very nicely and gave us just the lift we needed to put on a fun show there.
it so much. We like it so much.
Сегодня же играет футболист. Малыши будут 16, а те 18, да?
Ага. Вот посмотрим, как у нас по программе.
Ну, вот сейчас
а у
одно-
вас так, танцуют у вас здесь, чечетку выбивает здесь или нет?
у нас другие,
Вот
у нас другие, да.
No, they have different kind of dancing.
Выбиваете у нас на сагане, выбиваете хорошо.
Gypsy dances do something similar. Может быть, это как раз эта возможность показать все, что у нас
Да,
есть, показать.
и вот надо почаще иметь такую дружбу,
We need more
почаще.
often to have the meetings of this sort, so we can.
Это
come
лучше
together.
войны.
This is better than any kind of war or threat or just trying to prove someone's strength with the arms. This is just peace talk. That's the best kind of peace talk.
Но это пускай я поставлю, да.
Это пусть наши люди.
Да, это есть люди, пускай
Это у
работают.
них специальность.
А мы мировой народ, мы должны дружить.
Правильно.
И все.
Okay, said all our respective governments would negotiate all political questions and all those who are competent would talk on it. But here we are here, we're going to talk simple language, dance, sing, and just enjoy ourselves here.
What would they like to say to America?
Эти атомы нам не нужны, понимаешь, водороды нам не нужны, нам нужен мир.
Мир.
Да,
Вот
это.
это представители американского радио. Вот что вы хотели бы передать американскому народу.
Дружбы. И взаимного отношения почаще к нам приезжать, а мы к вам. И чтобы наш мир был во всем мире.
We would like to have friendship, that you come more often to visit us, we go more often to visit you, and we have this peaceful coexistence and cooperation forever. Как вы думаете, вот если мы все вместе во всем мире танцевать будем, что-нибудь толку от этого будет?
Только мир будет и дружба.
Just, if we all dance together and sing together, there will be only friendship and peace and cooperation and better understanding, and there will be no threat of any wars or anything that we have to be afraid of.
Чаще приезжайте в гости к нам. Мы будем знать.
Come again over and visit us.
Спасибо, спасибо. Почаще приезжайте к нам.
Да. Спасибо. Почаще приезжайте.
Это окей, окей, хорошо, да?
To have eaten of their food and then been able to dance for them was a real nice feeling for us. But they didn't think we'd eaten enough, so right after the performance, we went over to the formal hall and had a very nice lunch with the director and the cultural director and such. You know, and it was nice eating and toasting and toasting and toasting and got the juices flowing a little bit, and so we decided that we should do a little performance for the women who cooked the food because they couldn't be there. So we did a little show, a little routine for them, and sang them a song and gave them flowers, and they were as embarrassed and as shy and as appreciative as I guess anybody would be in that situation.
Certainly the lunch at the collective farm was a sumptuous meal, and we were feeling deprived after Moscow, but the food was really not very good. They had 3 million tourists there. One had a feeling supplies were pretty limited. Occasionally we'd get some wonderful caviar, but other than that it was not very good. So to sit down to this great meal at the collective with lots of fresh vegetables and fresh fruits, with a man who is the premier agricultural specialist of the nation. I mean, really a very famous agronomist running this farm.
To Premier feet.
Ну, здравый смысл победит. За мир во всем мире.
Real sense will win. Common sense will win, and we bring once more peace in the whole world. Yes, common sense. Common sense. To common sense.
When we arrived to Krasnodar, we were checking on the arrangements for a concert there, And we found out that in the hotel there's a nightclub type setting where they have a floor show and a review. And we thought it would be great for the cloggers to perform there. So we approached the manager of the hotel, and then she got the Russian professional group who was performing there to agree to allow the cloggers to use their stage to do a performance. And they rounded up a couple hundred people from the area and brought them in, and there was a nice concert there. The cloggers got to know the Russian professional musicians who were performing at the nightclub, and they started talking, and they said, well, why don't we get together after the Russians perform their show at night and just have a party. So everyone seemed to think that was a good idea, and that's what, after all, we went there to do. So after the restaurant closed, the manager of the hotel allowed us to use the restaurant to just for the cloggers and the rest of our delegation to meet with some Soviet people there and these professional dancers and singers. And we did that. It started after their show around 9 o'clock at night. Everyone brought something to drink, a little bit to eat, and we cleared all the tables and chairs away and just had the most amazing experience. I think it was one of the most memorable events of the entire trip because we really had a chance to interact and to everyone just to let ourselves go and just to have a good time with the people there. And some of the Russians were imitating the clogger dances, and their musicians were playing with our musicians. It was just the kind of thing that we went there to do. And I think everyone had an amazing time, especially at the end when we all joined hands in a circle and sang some songs together. And I don't think anyone will ever forget that evening. And although we only knew those people for a couple of hours, I think everyone left with the feeling that we were saying goodbye to old friends. And I think that's really what the trip was all about.
I was sitting there, and he grabbed me, and he started doing all this fancy stuff, and I just sort of danced around in a circle and got embarrassed. And then the other two, the Soviet women, came up and danced, and I sort of tried to follow them and fake it.
party was just an incredible happening that was pretty much spontaneous. Even though it was kind of semi-arranged, it turned real spontaneous. Like their band members came over and started playing flutes and horns to old-timey music. They were the ones that started up with Old Lang Syne and When the Saints Go Marching In, things like that. So there's definitely a common bond, in music and dance between everybody, really. But the thing that was so emotional about the whole thing was this Russian guy at the end got up and gave this about 10-minute monologue and had it translated about all kinds of things.
У нас, в общем-то, между вами такие какие-то натянутые отношения. Не здесь, а между нашими странами, между нашими народами, да, общие такие отношения. Не хотелось бы, чтобы это продолжалось дальше, понимаете? Не хотелось смотреть.
At this point, the relations between our countries is a little bit tense, and we would like to see them to stop and some relaxation become there.
Хотелось бы смотреть на Эда, на Степана через прицел автомата и прочее, понимаете? Эд, мы друг друга уже братом назвали.
Really, I wouldn't want to look at Ed or at David or at Stephen through the muzzle of the gun. Because we already called each other brothers here.
Хочется быть братьями и друзьями, встречаться только на сцене и вот так вот в зале.
We would like to be brothers and friends and meet only in the dancing hall. Russian bangers first.
All the best to you.
So we left Krasnodar on one side of the Caucasus Mountains and jumped on a bus on our way to Novorossiysk, the sister city. What's it going to be like? Rode a couple, 3 hours and came down the mountain, and there it was, tucked in against the south side of the Caucasus Mountains. Gorgeous, gorgeous Black Sea, busy port, big ships, and so the city we saw was new. But in commemoration of the battles and the losses that people suffered, The city was designated a hero city, one of the 11 in the Soviet Union. And the monuments that were constructed reflect the importance of these events.
Novorossiysk was one of the, I think, probably 4 or 5 crucial cities where the German drive was stopped. And it's exciting in the city to be taken to the point and to see the monuments where this really actually happened. And the city of Novorossiysk is the major port, apparently the best deep water port on the Black Sea. The city itself is ringed in by hills, and at the cement factories is where the battle went on and where the Nazis were stopped. They could go no further, and exactly that point is marked by a series of memorials, a brutal wall with hands grasping in weapons, Tommy guns and the rest. So part of the memorial is a boxcar that was obviously involved in the battle itself, and one is told that there were some 10,000 bullet holes in it. So here the Germans were held. And while the battle went on, perhaps for much of a year, during which time the population of the city were killed or fled, the Russians, feeling that the pressure might become too strong, decided they must divert the German strength. And so at night, they sent boats across the harbor and landed behind the German lines. Now, there are all sorts of memorials there. And the most important one for the Russians, one that I think many of the Americans felt was somewhat overdone with the pumping red heart and such, is shaped like the prow of a ship. And you go inside, and inside there are memorials and pictures and the rest. This is something very important to them. And you get a sense of this as when you see in every town or every city that at least there was where important battles were fought, there's a war memorial. A flame, an everlasting flame that's never put out, and on which guard is continuously maintained. And the guards who come are students, members of Soviet youth organizations, to which everybody belongs, the Komsomol. And apparently they compete, and the outstanding students are privileged to take their period guarding the unextinguishable flame. And they'll come marching in, holding their Kalashnikovs and submachine guns, goose-stepping in tents, with a sense that this is probably the most important moment of their lives. And I thought, my God, for yet another reason, I don't hope that we don't fight the Russians. I think if and the Russians were to go to war, the Russian youth would not be going to Sweden or elsewhere.
This whole socialization of Russia, by that I mean the children growing up and learning and internalizing the knowledge of what had gone on, particularly in the Second World War, and not only that, not only being taught that in school, but actually acting it out as protectors of the war memorials. The other aspect to this is the war memorials are all covered with flowers. And when you ask where the flowers come from, they say they come from the brides. And this strikes you as being a curious thing. And we saw in Kiev, for example, as we were coming away from the huge war memorial complex and park, a bride and groom drive up in their car, get out of their car, take their flowers from their wedding and walk off to the monument to place their flowers on the war memorial. And this was true in every place he went. All these memorials had flowers on them, and they were all presented by brides and grooms. So that I think this teaching the people about war and what had happened to Russia in the Great Second World War is a much more vibrant part of their culture than we have here in the United States.
While we were in Novorossiysk, we had an interesting opportunity to go into a Soviet home. That was the mother of Natasha Kalishman, who lives there, and she brought in her neighbors and her friend that had worked in the factory with her for 20 years. The friend's husband had been a merchant seaman on the ships, and we got a feeling of really meeting the real Russian people. It was a wonderful evening. I felt that I was in an apartment in Israel. I find great similarities between Israel and the Soviet Union, or it could have been an apartment in the Lower East Side of New York. Small and open with a little balcony, makeshift tables, one added onto the other, nice linens, nice china, obviously some treasures from the family that had been passed down. Lots of good homemade food, lots of informality. It reminded me more of a dinner party before the age of television and radio, where we would create hours and hours of group entertainment by intellectual inquiry and conversation. And one gets a feeling that that kind of thing is still going on in Russia.
So in Novorossiysk, then we were off to a kindergarten, one of the famous Soviet kindergartens. The climax of that visit was a performance that the kindergarten kids did for us, singing and dancing. And the highlight of that performance was they took an American song and put a little dance to it and asked us to get up and dance with them, which is a nice turnabout for us because we'd been doing it to the Soviet citizens in Moscow and in Krasnodar. And it struck me that the parallel, people dance and the people sing and it's all one. And that if we're not young people, we're not children, but we find a common ground with those who share the music. And I kind of have to hope that those people, just the people that we danced with and who ask us to dance, remember us as we remember them. And that will start some sort of chain that when they grow up and have children and our children know about this, that the chances for a little bit less clouded relationship between Soviet citizens and American citizens will be better. So we were in Novorossiysk, the place toward which we've been working for a year. The first thing on our mind was, well, let's dance. Let's dance. But nothing seemed to be going on. So we started trying to find out what's happening with our reception here and our performance here. Not much information was forthcoming. The next day, I went to a meeting that I thought was going to be with the city commission. It turned out to be with the deputy mayor, deputies mayor.
The meeting at the city council was disappointing to a certain aspect because a very popular commissioner had just died. The mayor was out of town fussing with his budget. So we met mainly with the cultural affairs director and the deputy minister, the deputy mayor, I guess, of Novorossiysk, and some people from utilities and other folks that would be interested. A warm reception, I felt, in more ways than one. The temperature was 104 degrees that day. Lots of protocol, a long speech that had to be interpreted that repeated some of the things that we heard that morning of a rich and brave history.
And each of us did our little speech, and I told the man that, terribly interested, the reason we're here is to dance. Dance for him and dance with him. And for us, that was the very first priority. So that started some scrambling, and it turned out nothing really had been set up in advance. But the guy that was the cultural affairs director was real interested. I mean, he was 100% for us. There wasn't any problem there. And we finally got a performance in Novorossiysk, in a setting that you couldn't ask any better for. The sound was wonderful, professional sound people, great weather, perfect time of day, and just because we were there making noise, attracted a pretty nice crowd. Gave one of the shows of our lifetime. High energy, good connection with the crowd, and a crowd of people from a grandmother that I kept being tempted to jump off the stage and hug, to the little tiny children. And that hour that we spent there was a very valuable hour, and it might be a little bit of an exaggeration, but at the time, it made the year's work worth it.
When the new day begins, I go down to the cotton gin and I make my time worthwhile to them. Then I climb back home again, 'cause she waits by the door. Oh, Cotton Jenny, I'm sore, and she rolls my feet as the sun goes down, and the wheels of love go round, wheels of love go round.
The Cultural Affairs Director of Novorossiysk, Sasha Titov, escorted Gene Chalmers and Natasha and I to the concert. And as we arrived on the scene, it was the most remarkable thing, because there you had the Caucasus Mountains, the harbor, the ships, and on an elevated concrete platform, there were the cloggers doing their clogging and music and dancing with the people of Novorossiysk. There was a crowd of 500 people at least, and it was just, it was thrilling for me to come up and see that, because there's never been anything like that in Novorossiysk. I think that really made me feel that this was the culmination of our efforts for the last 3 years, and I think everyone was really stunned by the whole event. And we really had the cooperation of the people, the City Council of Novorossiysk, and the Cultural Affairs Director, who went on stage and danced with the cloggers along with other people there that were watching the concert. So that was just an incredible event.
Now, we'd like to have you join us to do a dance.
А теперь мы приглашаем вас на танец.
You don't need to know any dances to do this. We'll help you.
Совершенно не обязательно уметь танцевать, мы вас научим.
Whoever would like to join in our dance may come up on the stage.
Итак, все те, кто хотят присоединиться к нам, выходите на...
First of all, that we want that there's never a war on
Самое главное,
this
чтобы наши,
planet.
как говорится, обоюдные страны жили
And
в
that
мире и в
both our
дружбе.
countries make good friends.
Тем более наша
The
страна
last dance in
занимается очень
Novorossiysk, it was as good as it could get. We wish there had been more, but it was now time to go home. And we headed on by way of Leningrad. Checked into a beautiful hotel and spent some time walking around the city and learning things that I just wondered where I'd been all my life. Why did I just now find out that Leningrad had been under siege for 3 years in the Second World War, and that 1 million people had died in and around Leningrad? It's incomprehensible. Gorgeous city, beautiful city, the Venice of the North. There were highlights of Leningrad, and there were highlights in Novorossiysk, and there were highlights in Moscow. But the highlight of the trip then was the night in Krasnodar at a party with some other dancers and singers from the nightclub there. And one of their dancers was a tap dancer, and he was going to show us something, but he didn't have any shoes with taps on it. Well, I had mine with me. And so I lent him my shoes, just because it was easier that way. And he slipped them on and he started to dance. Perfectly normal, no problem. Then it hit me. This is a Russian. And he's got your shoes on. You sweat in those shoes today. You dance in those shoes yourself today, and there's your sweat. And now he's got them on and he's dancing in them, and there's his sweat. And the two of us have been in the same shoes. I could, wax philosophic on the depth of the metaphor, but I think that's enough said. That when I dance now, I know that somebody else has been there. The only thing I regret is that he didn't teach my shoes how to dance better.
Major funding for this program is provided by Eastern Airlines and Florida Public Broadcasting Services, Incorporated.